Now we are going to discuss thorax and mediastinum. So first of all, we are going to discuss mediastinum. So what is mediastinum? Is the space between lungs in the center of thorax, and it is further divided into anterior mediastinum, posterior mediastinum, and middle mediastinum. So see the anatomy first. So if you see this picture, you can see that this is trachea and this is pericardium. Okay, so there is trachea and there is pericardium. So whatever the space which is anterior to trachea and pericardium, that is anterior mediastinum, and if it's located posterior to trachea and pericardium, it is posterior mediastinum, and if it is located within pericardium including trachea, so that is middle mediastinum. Okay, so one by one, see, anterior, also known as anterior superior mediastinum. So this space is anterior to trachea and pericardium. Posterior mediastinum, it is located posterior to trachea and pericardium, and this one is located within pericardium including the trachea. Now important point, that what are the mediastinal masses located in anterior mediastinum, middle mediastinum, and posterior mediastinum. So these are the important questions, one-liner questions which are frequently asked. First of all, let's discuss the anterior mediastinum. So most common anterior mediastinal mass, and that is thymoma. Most common middle mediastinal mass, that is cyst, and what kind of cyst? It's the pericardial cyst. And the most common posterior mediastinal mass, and that is neurogenic tumor. And if you are going to include all these, and if you see overall most common mediastinal mass, and that is neurogenic tumor. Okay, so see the one-liner questions. First of all, what is most common anterior mediastinal mass? And that's thymoma. It's the thymoma. Clear? The second question, most common middle mediastinal mass, and the middle mediastinal mass is cyst. Which type of cyst? It's the pericardial cyst. And most common posterior mediastinal mass, and that is neurogenic tumor. It's the neurogenic tumor. Clear? And if you see overall, out of thymoma, pericardial cyst, and neurogenic tumor, overall which one is most common? So overall most common mediastinal mass, is what? Neurogenic tumor. Clear? These are one-liner questions. Now see, for thorax and mediastinum, what is the investigation which is used for the diagnosis? So preferable investigation is CT for thorax and mediastinum. That's why for mediastinal masses also, investigation of choice for diagnosis is CT. The only exception is neurogenic tumor, because if there is neurogenic tumor, what is the investigation of choice for diagnosis? It's MRI. Okay, so two important points. Investigation of choice for diagnosis of mediastinal masses, and that's the CT scan. It's the CT scan. Simple. What is the exception? And the exception is neurogenic tumor. Exception, it's the neurogenic tumor. Clear? And for neurogenic tumors, what is the investigation of choice? And for neurogenic tumors, investigation of choice is what? MRI. Clear? So these are one-liner questions asked frequently related to mediastinal masses. Now we are going to discuss the distribution, that what are the masses which are seen in anterior mediastinum, middle mediastinum, and posterior mediastinum. So see the distribution: anterior, middle, and posterior, anterior, middle, and posterior. Okay, we discussed that what is the most common anterior mediastinal mass, and that is what? Thymoma. So most common anterior mediastinal mass is thymoma. So apart from thymoma, what are the other mediastinal masses which are seen in anterior mediastinum? So most common is thymoma. Apart from thymoma, there is aneurysm, bronchogenic cyst, germ cell tumor, parathyroid and thyroid masses, and lymphoma. And how to remember? It's very easy to remember. The mnemonic is TAB GPL. So it's TAB GPL. Okay, thymoma, aneurysm, bronchogenic cyst, germ cell tumor, parathyroid and thyroid masses, and lymphoma. Now see the middle mediastinum, and we discussed most common middle mediastinal masses. Cyst. Which cyst? Pericardial cyst. So here you can see the most common middle mediastinal mass is cyst, and which cyst? It's the pericardial cyst. What are the other cysts which are seen? There is bronchogenic cyst, enterogenous cyst, and neuroenteric cyst. Pericardial cyst, bronchogenic cyst, enterogenous cyst, and neuroenteric cyst. Apart from cyst, there is presence of aneurysm, lymphoma, and pheochromocytoma. Okay, in middle mediastinum. So how to remember? And here the mnemonic is scalp. Mnemonic is scalp. Clear? Here S is silent, so calp. C means cyst, A means aneurysm, lymphoma, and pheochromocytoma. In posterior mediastinum, what is the most common mediastinal mass? It's the neurogenic tumor. Right? This is the most common. What are the other masses which are seen? So apart from neurogenic tumor, we can see there is Bogdalic hernia, bronchogenic cyst, enterogenous cyst. There is meningocele, pheochromocytoma, mesenchymal tumors, and lymphoma. Okay. So how to remember? You will remember neurogenic tumors, and for rest the mnemonic is B MP MLA. Clear? So B MP MLA. B means bronchogenic cyst, Bogdalic hernia. E means enterogenous cyst. M means meningocele. P pheochromocytoma. M mesenchymal tumor, and LA, that is lymphoma. So if you want to enjoy life, you should become MP or MLA. So B MP MLA. So these are the distribution. These are the questions related to distribution. Now why you are supposed to remember that in which mediastinum which tumors are seen? Because sometimes the questions are asked and they will ask you the question that this tumor is seen in which mediastinum, or which of the following tumor is not seen in this mediastinum. Okay, that's why you have to remember, and mnemonics are there, so it's easy for you to remember. Another important question, that which three tumors are seen in all the three mediastinum? So what are those three tumors which are seen in all three mediastinum? So first is lymphoma, mesenchymal tumor, lymphoma, mesenchymal tumor, and bronchogenic cyst. Bronchogenic cyst. Okay, so these are the masses which are seen in all the three mediastinum. And how to remember? The mnemonic is limb. So can you see? Limb. So limb is seen in all the three mediastinum. So these three are seen in all three mediastinum. Clear? After that, there was one controversial question. This was asked in AIIMS also and in many state entrance exams, that overall most common mediastinal tumor is thymoma or neurogenic tumor. If you see the Bailey, in Bailey it's mentioned that it's thymoma, but if you see the relative percentage of tumors according to Schwartz, it is neurogenic tumor. See what's given in Schwartz. So see the list. Mediastinal tumor in adults first. Here you can see the percentage of neurogenic tumor, 21%, it's most common. On second number, cyst is there, and thymoma is on third number. So in adults, thymoma is on third number. And if you see the children, in children, what is the most common mediastinal mass? Can you see? Neurogenic tumor, and see the relative percentage, 40. Second is lymphoma, and third it's cyst. And see thymomas, rare in children, because what is the average age of thymoma? It is 4th to 6th decade. So in Bailey it is wrongly mentioned that thymoma is the most common mediastinal mass overall. Overall, most common mediastinal mass is neurogenic tumors. Now we are going to discuss in detail thymoma. Okay, so thymoma is the most common anterior mediastinal mass, most common anterior mediastinal mass. Clear? And this is the most common neoplasm of thymus gland. So this is the most common neoplasm of thymus. Okay. Generally, in what age group it is seen? We discussed it is seen in 40 to 60 years of age, and generally there is a fibrous capsule around the thymus. Now questions are asked that what are the types of thymoma. So if you see the questions related to pathology, there are three types. One is lymphocytic, second is epithelial, and third is lymphoepithelial. Okay, so important point, it is seen in 40 to 60 years of age and it is surrounded by fibrous capsule. Clear? Now see the question, what are the types of thymoma? Types. So if we see the types, it is of three types: lymphocytic, epithelial, and lymphoepithelial. Lymphoepithelial. Simple. Now if you see the relative percentage, lymphocytic is responsible for 25% cases, epithelial 25, and lymphoepithelial it's 50. So this is the relative distribution, 25, 25 and 50. Okay, so the question which is asked that what is the most common type of thymoma, and it is the lymphoepithelial. Okay, now see what is the location of thymoma, and if you understand the location, anatomy and its relation, it's very easy for you to understand the symptoms. Generally the size of thymoma is small. It's a small tumor, that's why majority of patients are not having any symptoms. And if patients are not having any symptoms, so how we are going to make the diagnosis? It is detected incidentally on chest x-ray. Okay, so see the clinical features. Most patients are asymptomatic. So mostly patients are asymptomatic. Why? Because the size of tumor is small. Okay, now if you see the location, so in which cases the patient will be symptomatic? Whenever the size of thymoma is large, so size of tumor is large, or sometimes there is invasion of surrounding structures, and sometimes there is associated paraneoplastic manifestations. So in these patients there are symptoms and these patients are coming to you. Now see the anatomy. So here you can see that in thymus there is right lobe and there is left lobe. Clear? And see the location. This is the location of thymus. It is in relation to, can you see what is this major vessel? This is superior vena cava, and this superior vena cava, can you see it is going to drain into right atrium. And here you can see there is trachea. So this is trachea. Behind trachea there is esophagus, and in between tracheoesophageal groove, means between trachea and esophagus there is tracheoesophageal groove, and in tracheoesophageal groove there is recurrent laryngeal nerve. So what you can see here, there is trachea, there is esophagus, and there is recurrent laryngeal nerve, and this is what superior vena cava. Now imagine whenever the tumor is large enough, and this large enough tumor, it starts compressing what? Trachea. So when there is compression of trachea, these patients will be having dyspnea. When there is compression of esophagus, these patients will be having dysphagia. And if there is involvement of recurrent laryngeal nerve, there is hoarseness of voice, also known as dysphonia. And if it is going to compress the superior vena cava, so there is superior vena cava obstruction leading to SVC syndrome, also known as superior vena cava syndrome. So what are the symptoms? See, because of compression of trachea, these patients have dyspnea. Because of compression of esophagus, these patients have dysphagia. Compression of recurrent laryngeal nerve, dysphonia, also known as hoarseness of voice. Simple. And see, when there is compression of this superior vena cava, there is superior vena cava syndrome. So these are the symptoms because of invasion or involvement or compression of surrounding structures. Now see what are the paraneoplastic syndromes associated with thymoma. The paraneoplastic syndromes associated with thymoma, these are further divided into autoimmune, hematological and neuromuscular. So it is divided into three categories. First, autoimmune, hematological and neuromuscular. Okay, now how to remember? The mnemonic is SLAP. For autoimmune it is SLAP. Okay, now see SL. So autoimmune disorder starting with SL, so obviously it is SLE. So it is SLE, and the second is sarcoidosis. So SLE and sarcoidosis. A means arthritis. Which kind of arthritis? Rheumatoid arthritis. So here arthritis, and which one? Rheumatoid arthritis. P means polymyositis. So it is polymyositis. Simple. Now coming to hematological, and here the mnemonic is RICH, but the spelling is a bit different. It's a bit different. Okay, R means red cell aplasia. So here red cell aplasia. E means erythrocytosis. C means cytopenia. So E, this is erythrocytosis. C, that's cytopenia. And H, it is commonly asked this paraneoplastic manifestation, which is hematological, hypogammaglobulinemia. So this is hypogammaglobulinemia. Okay, and now coming to neuromuscular, you must be knowing the most important is what? Myasthenia gravis. So the most important, which is asked in exam, myasthenia gravis. Second is myotonic dystrophy and myositis. Right? Myasthenia gravis, myotonic dystrophy, myositis. Out of this list, which are most important and frequently asked? First, SLE. Second, polymyositis. Third, hypogammaglobulinemia. Fourth, myasthenia gravis. These are the questions which are asked in exam. So we discussed that majority of patients are having small tumor, and that's why patients are asymptomatic. We are going to diagnose it incidentally. So see what are the findings on chest x-ray in thymoma. So in this you can see that, can you see there is bulge in anterior mediastinum? Can you see there is a mass with bulge towards left side? So there is bulge towards left side. Okay, and can you see what kind of margin is there? If you see, there is regular margin. So two findings what you can see here. First, there is bulge towards left side and there is regular margin. So this is the classical finding of thymoma. So where exactly you are going to see the mass? In anterior mediastinum, bulge towards left side, and there is regular margin. But we discussed, this is the X-ray finding, we discussed that for most of the mediastinal masses, what is the investigation of choice? It is CT. So here also, investigation of choice for diagnosis is CT. But for definitive diagnosis, histological confirmation is required. So two important questions related to diagnosis. Investigation of choice for diagnosis, and that's CT. But definitive diagnosis, for definitive diagnosis, what is required? We have to require histology. Histology is required. Now second important point. In anterior mediastinum, thymoma is there, lymphoma can be there. So how you can differentiate thymoma and lymphoma? So on the basis of markers we can easily differentiate. How? Thymomas are positive for cytokeratin, whereas lymphomas are negative. So how to differentiate thymomas and lymphoma? Thymoma, it's positive for cytokeratin, whereas lymphoma is negative. So this is negative for cytokeratin. So you can easily differentiate thymoma and lymphoma. Another important point, there is a named staging system used for thymoma, and what's the name? It's Masoka staging. So the named staging system used for thymoma, and it is Masoka staging. So this is also one liner question. Now coming to the management, see, thymoma is there. Okay, so obviously we have to excise the thymus gland, so we have to go for thymectomy. And how we perform thymectomy? First we have to perform the median sternotomy, and then we perform the thymectomy. Second situation, sometimes the size of thymoma is big, more than 5 centimeter, and there is involvement of or evidence of invasion. So if the size is more than 5 centimeter and there is evidence of invasion, so apart from thymectomy, what else we have to give? We have to give the chemotherapy. And third situation, you have seen this in medicine also, that patient is having thymoma, and because of thymoma patient is having myasthenia gravis. So in these patients, obviously we will go for thymectomy. With thymectomy, what else is given to the patients? Anticholine esterase drugs. So this is how we manage thymoma. So see the management aspect. So if patient is having thymoma, what is the treatment of choice for thymoma? It is the thymectomy, and which is performed after median sternotomy. Clear? Now second situation, whenever the size of tumor, thymoma, size is more than 5 centimeter plus there is evidence of invasion. Clear? So in these patients, apart from thymectomy, what else is given? We are giving chemotherapy to such patients. And third situation, there is myasthenia gravis. It is because of thymoma. So myasthenia gravis is there, which is because of thymoma. So in these patients also, obviously we will go for thymectomy, and with thymectomy we will give anticholine esterase drugs, right? So this is how we manage the thymoma. Second important topic is chronic mediastinitis. Chronic mediastinitis. Okay, so it's very easy to understand. There is mediastinitis, means inflammation of mediastinum. And what kind of inflammation? Chronic mediastinitis. So there is chronic inflammation of mediastinum. Now see, because of this chronic inflammation, what happens? There is fibrosis. And after fibrosis, what's the problem? There is encasement of the structures which are located in the mediastinum. So there is encasement of structures located in mediastinum, or because of this fibrosis, what happens? There is involvement of wall of surrounding structures. So since there is fibrosis in chronic mediastinitis, and that's why sometimes it is also known as chronic or fibrosing mediastinitis. Now see what is the cause. Why there is inflammation in the mediastinum? So you know that in the mediastinum there are lots of lymph nodes. So it is mainly because of tuberculosis and histoplasmosis. So what's the problem? What are the causes? It is mainly because of tuberculosis and histoplasmosis. Okay, so because of this tuberculosis or histoplasmosis, what we can see, what kind of inflammation we can see? Granulomatous inflammation. And not only granulomatous inflammation, the disease ranges from or varies from granulomatous inflammation to lymph node to fibrosing mediastinitis. Okay, so its spectrum ranges from, here what you can see, there is granulomatous inflammation of lymph node to fibrosing mediastinitis. Okay, fibrosing mediastinitis. Simple. So we discussed that there is chronic inflammation leading to fibrosis, leading to encasement of structures or involvement of wall of surrounding structures. Now see the symptoms. So whatever the structures which are there in the mediastinum, if there is encasement, there will be symptoms. Suppose there is involvement of airway. So if there is involvement of airway, these patients will be having what? Dyspnea. If there is involvement of recurrent laryngeal nerve, these patients will be having what? Hoarseness of voice. If there is involvement of superior vena cava, these patients will be having superior vena cava syndrome. So what's the cause of symptoms? Most of the patients are asymptomatic generally. Mostly asymptomatic. Okay. But what happens? whenever there is involvement or compression of mediastinal structures, if there is compression of mediastinal structures, because of this compression, what? There are symptoms. So it leads to symptoms depending upon the structure compressed. Simple. So what are the structures which are compressed commonly? So see, there is compression of airway, and because of this patient is having dyspnea. Compression of superior vena cava leading to superior vena cava syndrome. Sometimes involvement of recurrent laryngeal nerve leading to hoarseness of voice. Sometimes there is involvement of phrenic nerve also, phrenic nerve, or there can be involvement of pulmonary vessels. Clear? So these structures can be compressed leading to the symptoms. Now coming to the diagnosis. Like any other mediastinal mass, diagnosis of chronic fibrosing mediastinitis is made by CT. Okay? Treatment. Two causes are there. One is tuberculosis and second is histoplasmosis. So if diagnosis is confirmed that patient is having chronic mediastinitis because of tuberculosis, we give ATT. Otherwise, it's very difficult to treat chronic fibrosing mediastinitis because there is no effective medical or surgical treatment option for this condition. So two questions. First, for diagnosis, the investigation of choice for diagnosis, and that is CT. Clear? Now coming to the management or treatment. So if patient is having tubercular mediastinitis, for this we have ATT. Otherwise, there is no other medical or surgical treatment which is effective. So no other effective treatment. No other effective medical or surgical treatment. Now we are going to discuss the disorders of pleura. So first, see the basic anatomy. See the layers of pleura. There are two layers of pleura. One is visceral and one is parietal. So visceral, this is towards lung. So this is visceral pleura, which is of green color. It is towards lung. And there is parietal pleura, which is of blue color. This is towards chest wall. Okay, so there is visceral pleura and parietal pleura, and there is space between these two layers of pleura known as pleural space, also known as pleural cavity. So here you can see this is the space. Now see the problem. Whenever in this space there is collection of air or fluid, so if there is collection of air or collection of fluid, so collection of air is there, it is pneumothorax, and if there is collection of fluid, it is pleural effusion. Now see what is the effect. Now in this image we can see that there is collection of air or fluid, and because of this collection of air or fluid in pleural space, what will happen? There is collapse of ipsilateral lung, right? So how you can identify that when there is collection of air or collection of fluid? See this X-ray. So this is one of the commonly asked X-ray in the exams. Here you can see that this is the pleural edge. Can you see? Because you can see the vascular markings till this edge only. So you can see the vascular markings. Beyond this pleural edge, you can see that there is relatively black area. It's relatively more black. Which region? This region. And here you can notice that there are no vascular markings also. So what you noticed, that there is collection of air. So this is a case of pneumothorax. So first of all, we are going to discuss pneumothorax. So see what are the types of pneumothorax. Pneumothorax, okay. So what is pneumothorax? It is collection of air in the pleural space. It is collection of air in the pleural space, and because of that collection, there is collapse of ipsilateral lung. Now see what are the types. It is of three types. First, spontaneous pneumothorax. Spontaneous pneumothorax, which is also known as closed pneumothorax. Second is open pneumothorax. Why it is known as open pneumothorax? Because in this case there is loss of chest wall segment, and if there is loss of one part of chest wall segment, what happens? The chest cavity is open. So this is open pneumothorax. And the third is tension pneumothorax. Tension pneumothorax. So these are the three types. Now see what happens in these types. Now first, spontaneous pneumothorax, and it is also known as closed pneumothorax. Okay, why it is known as closed pneumothorax? Because here there is rupture of visceral pleura without any external trauma or iatrogenic cause. So since there is no external trauma, iatrogenic cause responsible for this pneumothorax, this is known as spontaneous or closed. Okay, so there is rupture of visceral pleura, and because of this what will happen? There is collection of air in the pleural space. Here, if we are going to compare the pleural pressure with atmospheric pressure, the pleural pressure is less than atmospheric pressure in closed pneumothorax or spontaneous pneumothorax. Now see second thing. Second is open pneumothorax, when there is loss of one part of chest wall segment. Because of loss of this chest wall segment, there is free calibration or equilibration of air pressure. So since it is open to external environment, there is equilibration of pressure, and if there is equilibration of pressure, the pleural pressure is equal to atmospheric pressure. Why? Because there is loss of chest wall segment in open pneumothorax. What is the problem in tension pneumothorax? There is formation of one-way valve air leak. So if there is one-way valve air leak, suppose this is the valve, okay? If patient is doing inspiration, the valve is going to open because of negative pressure, so air is sucked in. And if there is expiration, valve is closed. Why? Because there is positive pressure in the thoracic cavity. So during inspiration, air is sucked in. During expiration, air is not able to escape. So it is because of formation of one-way valve air leak. So what will happen over a period of time? Here, air is collected under tension. So air is collected under tension, and because of that there is excessive tension inside the affected hemithorax. So the problem here, the pleural pressure is more than atmospheric pressure, and over a period of time what are the consequences? See, obviously there is collapse of ipsilateral lung, there is shift of mediastinum to opposite side, and here you can see there is compression of vena cava. So compression of major vessels, and what else? There is depressed diaphragm. I'm repeating, what are the problems? There is collapse of ipsilateral lung. You saw shift of mediastinum to opposite side. There is depressed diaphragm and compression of major vessels like vena cava. Okay, so one by one we are going to discuss the types of pneumothorax. First, spontaneous pneumothorax, also known as closed pneumothorax. So see, spontaneous pneumothorax. So we discussed in spontaneous pneumothorax, visceral pleura ruptures. So what's the cause? It's because of rupture of visceral pleura. So visceral pleura ruptures in absence of any external trauma or iatrogenic cause. So there is no external trauma and there is no iatrogenic cause. No iatrogenic cause. Simple. And we discussed here that what pleural pressure is less than atmospheric pressure in spontaneous pneumothorax. Spontaneous pneumothorax is further divided into primary spontaneous pneumothorax and secondary spontaneous pneumothorax. Primary, here there is pneumothorax, spontaneous pneumothorax in absence of underlying lung pathology or disease. And secondary spontaneous pneumothorax means this spontaneous pneumothorax is secondary to underlying lung pathology or disease. So what are the types? First, primary spontaneous pneumothorax. Second is secondary spontaneous pneumothorax. In primary spontaneous pneumothorax, underlying lung disease, it's absent, so there is no underlying lung disease. Whereas in secondary spontaneous pneumothorax, it is secondary to underlying lung disease. One by one we are going to discuss. First, primary spontaneous pneumothorax. So primary spontaneous pneumothorax. Clear? Here there is spontaneous pneumothorax without underlying lung disease. Okay, now see what is the problem in these patients. Majority of these patients have apical subpleural bleb. What? Apical subpleural bleb, and because of rupture of this apical subpleural bleb, the air is collected into the pleural space. Okay, so what's the cause? Here the most common cause is the rupture of apical subpleural bleb. Clear? Now see what are the risk factors. Generally it is asked in medicine also. So it is more common in smokers, it is more common in males, it is more common in people who are having tall, thin body habitus like Marfan syndrome. So the risk factors: first, smoking. So more common in smokers. If patient is having positive family history, so positive family history, male gender, and Marfan syndrome. Marfan syndrome are the patients who are having tall, thin body habitus. So what kind of tall, thin body habitus? Okay, these are the risk factors. Now see the problem. Most common cause is rupture of apical subpleural bleb, and in that bleb the amount of air is not huge, so air goes into the pleural space. Since air is not huge, what happens? These patients have symptoms. What happens? There is sudden onset dyspnea, but since air is not huge, there is only mild dyspnea. Clear? So what are the clinical features? Since air is not huge in the bleb, there is sudden onset, mild dyspnea. Simple. Now coming to the diagnosis. Now one simple principle which is followed for most of the patients of pneumothorax. First, if a patient is having pneumothorax, what is the best investigation for diagnosis? And the best investigation for diagnosis of pneumothorax is NCCT. And see the next question, what is the best X-ray film for diagnosis of pneumothorax? Best X-ray film. So the best X-ray film is chest X-ray PA view. And which film? Expiratory film. Okay, so two important questions related to diagnosis. First, best investigation for diagnosis of pneumothorax, and that is NCCT. Okay, now second question, best X-ray film. Best X-ray film for diagnosis of pneumothorax, and this is chest X-ray PA view. Which film? Expiratory film is the expiratory film. Simple. Now how we are going to manage these patients? Initially, the initial treatment is simple needle aspiration. So we have to go for needle aspiration. But you know what is the treatment of choice? It's the ICD insertion in the triangle of safety. In which intercostal space? Fifth intercostal space in which line? Anterior axillary line. Okay. So management. The initial treatment is, what's the initial treatment? It's the simple needle aspiration. Simple needle aspiration. Okay. What is the treatment of choice? And the treatment of choice is ICD insertion, right? And where? In triangle of safety in fifth intercostal space in anterior axillary line. Now see, we follow up these patients with X-ray, chest X-ray, and now what you notice that leak is going to persist for more than 3 days. If leak is going to persist for more than 3 days, then we have to go for thoracoscopic management. And what we do in thoracoscopic management, first there is leak from pleural bleb, so we have to resect the bleb, and with resection of bleb we have to go for pleurodesis. So how we go for pleurodesis? With the help of TAC or with pleural abrasion. Okay, so see, in which case thoracoscopic management is done. Thoracoscopic management. So whenever the leak persists for more than 3 days, if leak is going to persist for more than 3 days, right? And what we do in thoracoscopic management, first reset the bleb, so bleb resection, and we perform the pleurodesis, right? So how this pleurodesis is done? We use TAC or we go for pleural abrasion. Okay, now you resected the bleb by this thoracoscopic management. Okay, so it is almost 100% effective in preventing recurrence since you resected the bleb. So it is almost 100% successful in preventing the recurrence. Now question, what are the indications of thoracoscopic management? So one is here, what if there is recurrence? And second, if in the first episode there is complete lung collapse. So these are the indications for thoracoscopic management. Okay, so what are the indications? So if there is recurrence, or if there was complete lung collapse in first episode, complete lung collapse, okay, in first episode. So in these cases we go for what? Thoracoscopic management. So this is how we manage primary spontaneous pneumothorax. Now see secondary spontaneous pneumothorax. Okay, so secondary spontaneous pneumothorax. So what's the problem here? In this patient there is spontaneous pneumothorax, and this spontaneous pneumothorax is because of underlying lung disease. So it is secondary to underlying lung disease. So what are the problems these patients are having? Generally these patients are smokers. So what? BD smokers or cigarette smokers. So these patients have COPD. So what are those? Lung disease. These patients have COPD. Some patients have cystic fibrosis and asthma. Okay. Now if you see primary spontaneous pneumothorax, there patient was having only mild dyspnea. But in secondary spontaneous pneumothorax, here the severity of symptoms is more. Why? Because with pneumothorax patient is having underlying lung disease also, and second, here patients are relatively older. Okay, so in secondary spontaneous pneumothorax, if you see the clinical features, so here more severe symptoms. So why these patients have severe symptoms? There are two reasons. One, because the patient is having underlying lung disease, and second, patients are relatively older. Okay, so what are the symptoms? These patients have sharp pleuritic pain and breathlessness. So the patients are having sharp pleuritic pain and there is breathlessness. Simple. Now how we are going to diagnose and how we are going to manage? See, so diagnosis and management protocol is almost similar to primary spontaneous pneumothorax. Like, what is the best investigation for diagnosis of pneumothorax? NCCT. What is the best X-ray film for diagnosis of pneumothorax? Chest X-ray PA view expiratory film. And what is the treatment of choice? Is the ICD insertion in the triangle of safety in the fifth intercostal space in anterior axillary line. Now we are going to discuss open pneumothorax. Okay, so what's the problem in open pneumothorax? Something is open. What? The chest cavity is open. Why chest cavity is open? Because there is loss of chest wall segment. So in this case, the chest cavity is open because of loss of chest wall segment. Okay, and it's very easy to understand. See this diagram. Now in this image, what you can see, that this part of chest wall, there is loss of this part of chest wall, and this is communicating freely with the external environment. And when it is communicating freely with external environment, because of this, what will happen? The pleural pressure is equal to atmospheric pressure. Okay, now see the inspiration and expiration. What happens? Whenever there is inspiration, our chest cavity moves out. So there is negative pressure, and that's why lung is going to collapse. And during expiration, when chest cavity moves in, there is positive pressure, that's why lung is going to collapse. When there is equilibration of pleural pressure with atmospheric pressure, now what's the problem? This lung is not able to expand. And if lung is not able to expand, what will be happening? There is compromised ventilation. And if there is compromised ventilation, what is the problem? There is hypoxia and hypercarbia. And because of this hypoxia and hypercarbia, the patient will be having breathlessness. So here, lung, it's not able to expand. And if lung is not able to expand, what's the problem? There is compromised ventilation or impaired ventilation. And because of this compromised ventilation, these patients have hypoxia and hypercarbia. So there is hypoxia and hypercarbia. Clear? And because of this, what's the problem? These patients have breathlessness. Right? Now in such patients, the severity of signs and symptoms is dependent on the size of defect. So here the signs and symptoms are dependent on the size of defect. Okay. Now how we are going to manage? Suppose this patient is having open pneumothorax, and what you did, you just closed the defect. You closed the defect, you occluded the defect. If you just simply occluded the defect, whatever the air which is already there inside the thorax, clear, it has compressed the lung, and because of that, what, lung is in collapse state, and because of that there is further compromise in ventilation. So rather than simply closing the defect or occluding the defect, we have to cover the wound with occlusive dressing, and this occlusive dressing should be like this, that it should be closed over 3 sides and 1 side should be open. So this occlusive dressing is applied, it is taped from 3 sides and 1 side will be open. Now how it works, see, whenever we are going for inspiration, since there is negative pressure, so what will happen? This valve is closed because there is negative pressure, and when expiration is done, since there is positive pressure, this valve is going to open. So it acts like a flutter valve, so that during inspiration, what happens? Air doesn't enter inside, but during expiration, the air escapes. So this is how it works. But this is a temporary management. What is the treatment of choice? Obviously, we have to close that defect, and we have to insert the ICD away from the defect. So how we manage? First, see the clinical features. So in these patients, signs and symptoms is directly proportional to size of defect. And see the management. So here we are using occlusive dressing, and you can see this occlusive dressing, it is taped on 3 sides, 1, 2, 3, and this is left untaped, so that whenever there is inspiration, this is closed, and whenever there is expiration, because of positive pressure, the air escapes. Clear? So there is escape of air via this occlusive dressing. So this is temporary management. Temporary management. Clear? What is the treatment of choice? The treatment of choice is closure of defect, closure of chest wall defect, plus ICD insertion away from the defect. ICD insertion away from the defect. So this is how we manage patients of open pneumothorax. So this is hemothorax. So what is hemothorax? Hemothorax. So blood accumulates in the pleural space. So there is collection of blood in the pleural space. So here you can see there is collection of blood in the pleural space. Clear? What is the cause of this hemothorax? So the most common cause of hemothorax is trauma, and because of this trauma there is injury to chest wall, and sometimes there is lung laceration. So what's the most common cause? Most common cause is trauma, and this trauma leads to injury to chest wall. So injury to chest wall, and sometimes there is lung laceration. Okay. Now see, In AIMS, this question was asked that what is the most common cause of massive hemothorax in blunt trauma? So see, in blunt trauma there is rib fracture, and because of this rib fracture there is torn intercostal vessels, and these torn intercostal vessels bleed profusely, and because of that there is massive hemothorax. So in patients of blunt trauma, what's the cause of massive hemothorax? Torn intercostal vessels. Torn intercostal vessels because of rib fracture. Okay, it leads to massive hemothorax. Simple. Now, what are the clinical features in patients of hemothorax? In patients of hemothorax, there are two problems. First, there is accumulation of blood in the pleural space, and second, there is loss of blood. So what happens? There is blood loss because it is being collected into the pleural space. So these patients are having signs and symptoms of hypovolemic shock. And one sign which you can see that there is what? Flat neck veins. One. So signs and symptoms of hypovolemic shock. Second, since there is collection of blood in the pleural space, so these patients will be having dyspnea. And if you are going to examine the patient, you perform the percussion, there will be dullness. And if you perform the auscultation, there is absence of breath sound on affected side. Clear? So what is the problem here? It's easy to understand. There are two problems. First, there is loss of blood in the pleural space. Because of this, patient is having hypovolemia or hypovolemic shock, and because of this you will see that there is flat neck veins. Okay, one problem. Second, since there is collection of fluid in the pleural space, because of that patient is having dyspnea. If you perform the percussion, on percussion there is dull note. And if you perform the auscultation, on auscultation there is unilateral absence of breath sounds. So on affected side there is absence of breath sound. Clear? Now how we can diagnose this easily in the emergency? So easiest way, you insert the needle and aspirate. Insert the needle in the pleural space and aspirate. You will notice that there is presence of blood. So diagnosis is confirmed. Second, but we have to evaluate the extent and presence of blood. So presence of blood and its extent, and for that we go for chest X-ray. So how we are going to diagnose it? Needle aspiration of pleural space. Needle aspiration of pleural space. Clear? And we go for chest X-ray. What's the role? To assess the presence and extent of collection. Presence and extent of collection. And what is the treatment? The treatment of choice is ICT insertion. And where we are going to insert the ICT? ICT insertion in 5th intercostal space in triangle of safety in anterior axillary line. There are certain cases in which we have to perform the thoracotomy. Now we are going to discuss thoracic duct injury. But before discussing thoracic duct injury, we are going to discuss the anatomy of thoracic duct. Okay. Now see here, this is the thoracic duct, and you can see this thoracic duct is going to drain into left brachiocephalic vein. Ultimately, drainage goes into left brachiocephalic vein. What is the exact site of drainage? Here you can see this is the left internal jugular vein, and this is left subclavian vein. Okay, so I'm repeating, thoracic duct is going to drain at the junction of left internal jugular vein and left subclavian vein, and its drainage finally goes into left brachiocephalic vein. Clear? Now see the anatomy of this particular region. If you see this structure, this is left subclavian artery. Clear? This is what? Arch of aorta. So anteriorly what you can see, this is the left subclavian artery. Posteriorly what you can see, this is the vertebral column. right? And inferiorly there is arch of aorta. So this is a triangular region where we can identify this thoracic duct. And what is the name of this triangle? This is known as Poirier's triangle. Okay, so how we can identify thoracic duct? Thoracic duct can be identified after posterolateral thoracotomy. On which side? Left side. So we can perform left posterolateral thoracotomy, and in left posterolateral thoracotomy this thoracic duct can be identified in a triangle, and the name of that triangle is Poirier's triangle. What's the name? The name of triangle? It's Poirier's triangle. Clear? So what are the boundaries? We discussed anteriorly there is left subclavian artery, posteriorly there is vertebral column, base is found by arch of aorta, and generally in the floor which structure is there? Esophagus. So on esophagus it is going to traverse. So see the Poirier's triangle. So here you can see Poirier's triangle. Can you see which structure is anteriorly? So this is what? This is the left subclavian artery. Clear? So anteriorly which structure is there? It is the left subclavian artery. Now see which structure is posteriorly. Here you can see this is vertebral column. So this vertebral column, it is located posteriorly. Okay, and see this is what? Base. So base or inferiorly which structure is located? This is arch of aorta. So arch of aorta is going to form the base, or it's located inferiorly. Clear? Now see, here you see in the floor there is esophagus. So floor is formed by esophagus. Clear? And you can find this thoracic duct here. Clear? So I'm repeating again. Anteriorly there is left subclavian artery, posteriorly there is vertebral column, the base or inferiorly there is aortic arch, and the floor is formed by esophagus. So we are going to identify this thoracic duct into this Poirier's triangle, and it is going to traverse on the esophagus. Clear? Now one question. So in which cases there is thoracic duct injury? Now imagine whenever we are performing the thoracic surgery, and especially the lymph node dissection in this Poirier's triangle, what will happen? There is injury to thoracic duct. So what is the most common cause of injury of thoracic duct? It's the iatrogenic trauma. Clear? So in detail we are going to discuss the thoracic duct injury. Thoracic duct injury. Clear? So what's the most common cause? And the most common cause is iatrogenic trauma. It's the iatrogenic trauma. Okay, so generally during which surgeries? Yes, it is generally seen in thoracic surgeries, and especially when there is lymph node dissection. Clear? And lymph node dissection in which particular triangle? Poirier's triangle. In Poirier's triangle. So this is the most common cause. Apart from iatrogenic trauma, what are the other causes? Other causes, it can also be caused by blunt or penetrating trauma. So it can be caused by blunt or penetrating trauma. Simple. Now see the problem. Whenever this thoracic duct is injured, thoracic duct is mainly containing chyle, and this chyle is going to drain into left brachiocephalic vein ultimately. When this thoracic duct is injured, this chyle starts going into thoracic cavity and it starts collecting into thoracic cavity. So what's the problem? There is chylothorax. Second, whenever we perform thoracic surgery, we insert the drain also, and from drainage site you will notice that there is leakage of chyle, and because of this chyle leakage, what is the problem? Patient will be having dehydration. Second problem, you know the composition of chyle. In chyle there is fat, there is protein, there is electrolytes. So there will be losses of these substances and there will be consequences. So what are the clinical manifestations? See, the clinical features of thoracic duct injury. So since there is loss of chyle into thorax, there is chylothorax. Clear? Second, chyle loss from drainage sites. So loss of chyle from drainage sites, so it will go into drain, and because of this what happens, since there is volume loss, it leads to dehydration. One effect is volume loss leading to dehydration. Second, see the composition of chyle, and then you can understand what will be the effects. So the composition is fat and cholesterol. So in chyle there is fat and cholesterol. So whenever there is loss of fat and cholesterol, what will be the problem? This patient will be having loss of fat, simultaneously there is loss of fat soluble vitamins. Okay, so two problems, loss of fat and what else? Fat soluble vitamins. Fat soluble vitamins. Simple. Now see the second problem. It is going to contain protein. It contains protein, and since there is loss of proteins, what's the problem? Patient will be having hypoproteinemia. So the effect is there is hypoproteinemia. Clear? It contains sugar. It contains electrolytes. So there is sugar, there is electrolytes. Because of loss of electrolytes, what's the problem? Yes, there is dyselectrolytemia. There is dyselectrolytemia. Right? And what is the another problem? In chyle there is presence of lymphocytes also. So if there is loss of lymphocytes, these patients will be having lymphopenia. So there is loss of lymphocytes. Clear? And because of this, what is the problem? These patients will be having lymphopenia. Okay, so these are the clinical manifestations. Now see, in majority of cases we go for conservative management. Why? Because most common cause is iatrogenic trauma, and the chances of spontaneous closure after conservative management is higher. Okay, so what we do in this case? Management. So first, conservative management. Generally in majority of patient we go for conservative management high. Why? Because there is higher rate of spontaneous closure. Higher rate of spontaneous closure. In which cases there is higher rate of spontaneous closure? The cases in which thoracic duct injury is caused by iatrogenic trauma. Clear? So the cases in which the injury is caused by iatrogenic trauma. Okay, now see the problem. Chyle is having high fat content, and that's why we have to advise diet which should be low fat. So what are the components of conservative management? Low fat diet. Okay, and in low fat diet especially we are going to advise medium chain triglycerides. This is very important point and it was asked many times. So which triglycerides? Medium chain triglycerides are advised. Second, we have to advise total parental nutrition. So we give total parental nutrition. And since patient is having dyselectrolytemia, we have to correct the dyselectrolytemia. So correction of, we go for correction of dyselectrolytemia. Okay, so this is the part of conservative management. Now see, whenever there will be output, the chances of spontaneous closure is less. So we have to decrease the output also to facilitate the closure. And you must be knowing that one substance which is going to decrease the drain output, and that is what? Octreotide. And there is a second agent which is used here, and this is atelephrine. It's an adrenergic agent and it is going to cause smooth muscle contraction in thoracic duct, and because of this also it is going to facilitate the closure. Okay, so to decrease the output, and if you decrease the output, it facilitates the closure. It facilitates the closure. We have to give certain drugs. So first, which drug is going to decrease the drain output? We give octreotide. So drug is octreotide, and the second drug, it's very important, second is atelephrine. You have to remember the name. Atelephrine is an adrenergic agent. And what it is going to cause? It causes smooth muscle contraction in thoracic duct. So it causes smooth muscle contraction. Okay, in thoracic duct, and this facilitates the closure. Now, what's the surgical treatment of choice? So, surgical treatment is performed via VATS. We perform video assisted thoracoscopy and we ligate the thoracic duct. So, the surgical treatment of choice is VATS guided thoracic duct ligation. Okay. So, what is the surgical treatment of choice? And it's the VATS guided thoracic duct ligation. VATS guided thoracic duct ligation. Okay, so see, what are the indications of surgery? So in these cases, what are the indications of surgery? Now see, even after 5 days of conservative management, if the chyle loss is more than 1500 ml or the drain output means the leak is going to persist for more than 2 weeks. So in these two cases, we go for surgery. So first, whenever there is chyle loss more than 1500 ml, even after 5 days of conservative management, after 5 days of conservative management, right? Or second, if leak persists after 2 weeks, after 2 weeks. Clear? So in these cases, we go for VATS guided thoracic duct ligation. There is another topic important related to chyle, and that is chyluria. So the term is self-explanatory. What happens? There is chyluria. So can you see here? The chyle is going into urinary tract. So why chyle is going into urinary tract? Because chyle is present in the lymphatic duct. So there is fistula between lymphatic duct and urinary tract. So what kind of fistula? These patients have lympho-urinary fistula. So first, what's the cause of chyluria in these patients? There is lympho-urinary fistula. Lympho-urinary fistula. Clear? So there is communication between lymphatic duct and urinary tract. First important point, that what is the most common cause of chyluria? And the most common cause of chyluria is related to lymphatic duct abnormality, and that is filariasis. So most common cause, and the most common cause is filariasis. Okay, what are the other causes of chyluria? So see the other causes. So it include malaria, tuberculosis, pregnancy, malaria, tuberculosis, pregnancy, trauma during childbirth, ascariasis, or tumor. So childbirth, ascariasis and tumor. Clear? So these are the other causes. Now how to remember? You can see the mnemonic is MTP-CAT. So what's the mnemonic? MTP-CAT. Malaria, tuberculosis, pregnancy, childbirth, ascariasis, tumor. So it's easy. But the most common cause which is asked frequently, and that is filariasis. Now see the problem. So whenever there is lympho-urinary fistula and this patient is going to eat some fatty stuff, or patient is having fatty meal, so what will happen? After taking fatty meal, the chyle goes into lymphatic duct, and since there is lympho-urinary fistula, from lymphatic duct the chyle enters into the urine. So patient will be having painless passage of milky white urine. What? Painless passage of milky white urine. This is one problem. So see clinical features here. If this patient is taking fatty meal, okay, so after this fatty meal the chyle goes into lymphatic duct. So chyle in lymphatic duct. Since there is fistula, so this chyle enters into urinary tract, right? And after that, what's the problem? there is passage of milky white urine. And what kind of? It's painless. So there is painless passage of, you have to remember this milky white urine term, milky white urine. Okay, one problem. Now second problem, in certain cases what happens in the urinary tract, this chyle is going to clot. So if this chyle is going to clot in the urinary tract, this patient will be having what? Renal colic. So the patients will be having what? Renal colic if it is going to clot. Third problem, in chyle, apart from fat, there is loss of fat. Apart from fat, there is proteins also. So if there is protein, so what will happen? There is loss of protein. So via chyle, there is loss of protein. And if there is loss of protein, these patients will be having what? Hypoproteinemia. Hypoproteinemia. Now see here, depending upon the clinical manifestation, you can easily remember that what will be given in the management. See the problem. These patients have loss of protein, clear? And chyle is having high fat content. So in management, we have to give low fat, high protein diet is given. Second, these patients are having renal colic because of clotting of chyle. So there is clot colic. So how we can avoid the clot colic? To prevent this formation, we have to encourage high fluid intake. So we advise the patient to take high fluid. Clear? So these will be included in the management. By the way, first see the diagnosis. So here there is a basic problem, lympho-urinary fistula. So we have to assess the urinary tract and lymphatic duct. So for assessment of urinary tract, what we go for? We go for IVU or IVP plus minus lymphangiography. So we go for IVU or IVP plus minus lymphangiography. And we discuss the management. In the management, we advise what? Low fat and high protein diet. Clear? Second, we advise high fluid intake to avoid or to prevent clot colic. Clear? And if there is no improvement, generally what we do, we have to perform the laparotomy and we have to ligate the distal lymphatics. So what is the surgical treatment? We perform laparotomy and ligation of distal lymphatics. Ligation of distal lymphatics. Clear? So this is how we are going to manage the chyluria. Now we are going to discuss the lung abscess. There is lung abscess. Okay, so we discussed liver abscess. It is almost similar. Certain principles are similar. So what happens here? There is microbial infection of lung, and because of that there is necrosis of liver parenchyma. So here there is microbial infection, and because of this microbial infection of lung, there is necrosis of lung parenchyma. And because of this necrosis of lung parenchyma, there is formation of lung abscess. So in abscess, there is collection of pus, and generally you notice that there is abscess cavity, and in that abscess cavity you can see air fluid level also in the lungs. Clear? Now one basic principle we discussed. Any patient having pus collection anywhere in the body, what are the clinical manifestations? So these patients are having fever with chills and rigor. And here, what is additional symptom? Since it is involving the lungs, these patients are having cough and there is putrid smelling sputum production. Cough with putrid smelling sputum production. Okay, now see the problem. Generally, the patients who are having colonization of this oropharynx with anaerobes, and if there is risk or increased risk of aspiration, so whenever there is aspiration of this oropharyngeal secretions containing anaerobes, what happens? There is lung abscess. And what is the most common cause of primary lung abscess? In majority of cases, these are anaerobes. Okay, so problem, generally what's the most common etiology? There is Most common etiology of anaerobic lung abscess. So it is aspiration. Clear? Aspiration. And what is the most common cause? So most common cause of primary lung abscess. So the most common cause of primary lung abscess, and these are anaerobes. Clear? So in lung abscess which is caused by anaerobes, this is known as anaerobic lung abscess. What is the most common etiology? It's aspiration. So I'm going to repeat. Generally, there is colonization of oropharynx with anaerobes, and whenever there is aspiration of the secretions, what happens? These patients will be having anaerobic lung abscess. Right? Now see, because of this aspiration, generally, what is the most common site? It's the dependent part of lungs. So if we compare right and left lung, which is more dependent, because you can see there is vertical orientation of right mainstem bronchus. Right lung is more commonly involved, and in right lung, dependent portion means posterior segments of upper lobe and superior segments of lower lobe. So see, what's the most common site in primary lung abscess? These are the dependent segments. Dependent segments of lung. Clear? So it is more common in which lung? More common in right as compared to left lung. And generally, which segment? It's the posterior segment of upper lobe, and it's the superior segment of lower lobe. These are asked in exam frequently. Clear? Now route of infection. So we discussed what's the most common route of infection. It's the aspiration. So see, routes of infection. So the most common route of infection is the aspiration. Clear? So this is the most common route. Apart from aspiration, there is inhalation of infection or aerosols. So inhalation of infection and sometimes aerosols. There is hematogenous dissemination also, especially if patient is having subacute bacterial endocarditis. There can be direct inoculation or contiguous spread also. Okay, so direct inoculation, right, and there can be contiguous spread. Simple. Now coming to the clinical features. So we discussed that there is cough with putrid smelling sputum production, and these patients are having fever. Apart from fever, these patients have fatigue. So clinical features, there is cough. You have to remember the term putrid smelling. So there is putrid smelling sputum production. Clear? There is fever and fatigue. These are the common symptoms. So how we are going to diagnose lung abscess? Generally we perform the CT. Sometimes we can make the diagnosis on chest X-ray also. Okay, so see, diagnosis. Here investigation of choice for diagnosis, that is CT scan. And sometimes on chest X-ray also we can make the diagnosis. See how it looks like on chest X-ray. So in this chest X-ray, can you see here is the lung abscess, and in this can you see there is cavity, and you can see that there is presence of air and there is fluid. So there is abscess cavity, and this abscess cavity is having air fluid levels. Clear? So you can see the cavitation. So in this lung abscess you can see formation of cavity, so cavitation, and there is air fluid, presence of air fluid level. Clear? So these are the findings which is seen on chest x-ray, but the investigation of choice for diagnosis is CT scan. Now coming to the treatment. So see, the treatment depends on the etiology. Suppose anaerobes are responsible for lung abscess, then what is the drug of choice? It's the clindamycin. And if Staph aureus is responsible for lung abscess, then what is the drug of choice? It's the vancomycin. Okay, so management depends on etiology. If anaerobes are responsible, anaerobes, in that case the drug of choice is clindamycin. Clear? And if it is caused by Staph aureus, these are the two common agents. Yes, what's the drug of choice? It's the vancomycin. Vancomycin. Clear? Now, what are the indications of surgery? So imagine we are giving conservative management and there is no improvement. Sometimes there is hemorrhage. So these are the indications for surgery. So what are the indications for surgery? Okay, so first, failure of conservative management. So there is no improvement. If there is suspected neoplasm, so there is suspected neoplasm, or whenever there is hemorrhage. So what are the causes of failure of conservative management or medical management? So generally sometimes if we are not able to drain the pleural collections, sometimes there is obstructed bronchus, sometimes the organism which is there, it is resistant to antimicrobial therapy. So all these are the causes of failure of medical management. Okay, so see, so the causes are failure to drain pleural collections, if we are using inappropriate antimicrobial therapy for which the organism is resistant, sometimes there is obstructed bronchus, our patient is having giant abscess which requires drainage, and sometimes the lesion is refractory and sometimes the pathogen is refractory. So these are the causes of failure of medical management and we need surgical intervention for these cases. Now we are going to discuss pleural effusion. So what happens in pleural effusion? There is collection of fluid in pleural space. Okay, so it's very easy to understand. See, so in this case here you can see that there is collection of fluid in the pleural space. So this is pleural effusion. This pleural effusion can be exudative and transudative. Now what is exudate and transudate? See, if some local inflammatory pathology is there like tuberculosis, there is increased protein content. So this is exudative. And whenever some systemic illness is there like congestive heart failure, relatively the protein content is low. So that is transudative. So this pleural effusion, it's further divided into two types. It can be exudative and it can be transudative. Okay, now how we can differentiate these two? We can easily differentiate exudative and transudative pleural effusion. How? If we can assess the protein ratio, so we can assess the pleural fluid protein to serum protein ratio, and we can assess LDH, means pleural fluid LDH to serum LDH ratio. So we can easily differentiate exudative pleural effusion from transudative pleural effusion by a criteria. And what's the name of that criteria? And that's known as Leitz criteria. The name of this criteria, it's known as Leitz criteria, right? So what is this? See here, the first is pleural fluid protein to serum protein ratio. It should be more than 0.5. Second, the pleural fluid LDH to serum LDH ratio should be more than 0.6. And third, if pleural fluid LDH, it is more than 2/3 of upper limit of serum value. So it is more than 2/3 of normal upper limit for serum. Okay, these are the three components of Leitz criteria. Now see, out of these three, if a single is present, even if at least one is positive, it means it is exudative, and if none is positive, it means it's transudative. So at least in exudative, at least one is positive. Clear? And in transudative, none is positive. None. Light's criteria is asked in medicine also, it is asked in surgery also. So one thing you have to remember, that in majority of cases, if you have to remember the exudative causes of exudative pleural effusion, so generally it's the local inflammatory pathology, and in transudative pleural effusion it's the systemic illness. So see what are the causes. So first, causes of exudative pleural effusion. Causes of exudative pleural effusion. Clear? So in India, the most important cause is tuberculosis, second is malignancy, carcinoma lung, or in cases of metastasis, and third, connective tissue disorders, and fourth, in medicine you have seen what? Pneumonia. Pneumonia. Clear? So how to remember? You must be knowing this party, TMC, Trinamool Congress. So TMC, pneumonia. So you can remember the causes of exudative pleural effusion. In DNB and in NEET, they ask the list of drugs which causes exudative pleural effusion. So see the list of drugs causing exudative pleural effusion. So what are the drugs causing exudative pleural effusion? So the mnemonic is DNB MAP. D means dantrolene dasatinib, N means nitrofurantoin, B bromocriptine, M methisergide, A amiodarone, and P procarbazine. So how to remember? The mnemonic is DNB MAP. Since it is frequently asked in DNB, so this is DNB MAP. This list is very important. It is asked in pharma also, medicine also. Now see the causes of transudative pleural effusion. Transudative pleural effusion. Clear? So most important, we discussed CHF, myxedema, clear, urinothorax. It is also going to occur when we are going to perform the peritoneal dialysis. So peritoneal dialysis. You have seen patients who are having cirrhosis, having pleural effusion, nephrotic syndrome, and superior vena cava syndrome because of SVC obstruction. So superior vena cava obstruction. Clear? So how to remember? CM of which state? UP has CNS. Okay, so CM of UP has CNS. CM of UP has CNS. Clear? So these are the causes of transudative pleural effusion. Now see the questions related to investigations. What is the investigation of choice for detection of minimal pleural effusion? Minimal pleural effusion, and that is ultrasound. So how much fluid can be detected by ultrasound? 1 ml. And second group of question, that in chest x-ray which view can detect how much fluid? So two set of questions. See, in relation to diagnosis, first, what is the investigation of choice for detection of minimal pleural effusion? Minimal pleural effusion, and that's ultrasound. So how much minimal amount of pleural effusion means fluid can be detected? It can detect 1 ml. Now see, questions related to chest x-ray, that which view detect how much fluid in pleural effusion. So if we go for chest x-ray, if it's PA view, it is going to detect 100 to 200 ml. So in chest x-ray, PA view, you have to remember the values. It is going to detect 100 to 200 ml. If it is lateral view, it is going to detect 75 ml. lateral view, it detects 75 ml. Clear? And lateral decubitus view, it is going to detect less than 10 ml. So which is the best chest x-ray view? It's the lateral decubitus view. Clear? So third is lateral decubitus view, and this lateral decubitus view, it is going to detect the fluid how much? Less than 10 ml. So this is the best chest x-ray view. Where you are going to do the mistake in exam. In exam, the question is asked, investigation of choice for detection of minimal pleural effusion. And the first is PA view, second is lateral view, third is lateral decubitus view of chest x-ray, and fourth is ultrasound. So what is the correct answer? It's the ultrasound. And what is the best chest x-ray view for detection of minimal pleural effusion? And that is lateral decubitus view. Now see how it looks like on chest x-ray. So in this, can you see this is the margin? Clear? And here you can see this is the lungs. So you can notice that what? There is collection of fluid. Clear? So you can correlate it with this diagram. So this is the chest x-ray showing pleural effusion. Now how we are going to manage? The management is dependent on the cause. So management, it depends on the cause. Clear? But in majority of cases, what is the treatment of choice? We have to insert the ICD. So where exactly? In fifth intercostal space, in triangle of safety, in anterior axillary line, right? So management depends on the cause, but the treatment of choice in majority, it's ICD insertion in triangle of safety, in fifth intercostal space, in anterior axillary line. So this is how we manage pleural effusion.